I have replayed that morning 11,000 times. Not on a recorder, in my head, which is worse because my head does not have a pause button, and my head insists on slowing down the part where his arm bent the wrong way. You want to know the sound. Everyone always wants to know the sound. It wasn't loud. That's the thing that people never believe. A cadet's elbow coming apart in the middle of a sparring hall should be thunder. It should crack the ceiling. It should be the kind of noise that lives in your dreams and wakes you up sweating in your bunk at third shift. It was small, wet and small, like snapping a stalk of ribbon cane between two fingers. And then one full second later, one whole second, and I counted, because counting is what my people do when we are frightened, Instructor Rune said. What? Not a question, not a shout, just the word, flat, like she'd been handed something she didn't order. That's how fast it happened. The instructor of combat applications, a Carolan who fought at the Fenrun Gap and came home with 2 limbs missing and a decoration she never wore, did not have time to finish blinking. So yes, I'll tell you. But you have to let me start earlier than you want me to. Because if I start at the elbow, you'll think Tamsin Rowe was a monster. She wasn't a monster. She was the only person on Lattice 9 who ever asked me if my dormitory was too cold. My name is Pelvero, I'm Ashun. If you've never met one of us, imagine something built by a committee that ran out of budget. We're tall, roughly your height plus a hand if you're human. We're thin in a way that alarms medics. And our bones are hollow, not metaphorically, not light for our size, actually hollow, with a lattice of struts inside, like a bird's wing bone if you scaled it up and gave it a philosophy degree. We break easily, that's the short version. A fall from standing height in standard gravity can put an Ashun in a regeneration cradle for 2 weeks. We do not play contact sports. We do not wrestle our siblings. Our children are raised in padded rooms, and I am not being dramatic. I mean literally padded, with foam that costs more than a shuttle ticket. What we do have instead of strength is bone hearing. Our skeleton is a resonance chamber. Sound comes in through the floor, through the walls, through the air, and it plays across those hollow struts, and we feel it the way you might feel a hand on your shoulder. I can stand in a corridor with my eyes closed and tell you how many people are walking 2 decks below me. I can tell you if one of them is limping. I can tell you if one of them is carrying something heavy on their left side. I am telling you this because it matters. It matters because when Sarn Dai's elbow came apart, I did not hear it with my ears. I felt it in my ribs. Lattice 9. Officially, the Corlath Combined Academy, Orbital Facility 9, Educational Command of the Compact of Worlds. Unofficially, a bent ring of gray composite hanging in the upper cloud shadow of a gas giant named Ossuary, which is a terrible name for a planet, and which nobody has ever successfully explained to me. 60,000 cadets from 91 member species, 400 instructors, a cafeteria that served 11 distinct chemistries and got at least one of them wrong every single week. Ossuary filled half the sky. You could look out the observation blisters and watch storms the size of moons crawl across its face, slow and patient, like something breathing under a blanket. Cadets from planetary species hated it, made them feel small. The void-born ones loved it. I was somewhere in the middle. I liked it best at what we called night, when the station's rotation put us in the planet's shadow, and the storms lit themselves up from inside with lightning, great orange veins flickering under the cloud tops, silent, hundreds of kilometers long. You'd stand at the glass and watch a lightning bolt that could swallow your homeworld, and it made no sound at all. That's the thing about Lattice 9. Everything terrible about it was silent. The station ran on gravity plating. Standard compact gravity, which is calibrated to 0.9 of old Earth Prime, which is the homeworld of the species that wrote the calibration standard 1100 years ago, and which, I would like to note, for the historical record, is a species with an average adult mass of 31 kilograms. Nobody ever asked anybody else. That's a joke. I'm allowed a joke this early. It gets worse from here. The humans arrived in my second year. Not the humans, plural as a species. Humanity had been compact adjacent for a while by then, provisional trade status, 3 embassies, a lot of arguing in committees about whether their homeworld qualified as habitable or as an ongoing industrial accident. They'd been on the edge of the map for years. Curiosities. A footnote in comparative biology, filed under Class 9 environments, next to a photograph of something called a bear, which the textbook described, and I quote, as a common terrestrial omnivore. Common. But cadets, actual human cadets in the academy, sharing our corridors and our air and our food analog dispensers, that was new. That was a policy decision that had gone through 4 committees and lost most of its dignity along the way. 12 of them in the intake of my second year. 12 out of 60,000. 12 is not a lot. 12 is a rounding error. You could feel them anyway. Bone hearing again. When a human walked down a corridor on Lattice 9, I knew about it 3 sections before they arrived. It wasn't volume. It was density. Their footfalls hit the deck plating and the plating hit my skeleton and it said, heavy, dense, something in there that doesn't compress. I mentioned it once to a Carolan cadet named Ozzo. He laughed at me. They're small, he said. They're shorter than you. Yes, I said, I know. He didn't understand. To be fair, I didn't understand either. Not then. I just knew that something small should not sound like that when it walks. Now Deathworlds. You have to understand how the compact classifies planets, or none of this makes sense. There's a number, and the number is generated by an algorithm nobody has audited in 6 centuries, and it takes in gravity, atmospheric composition, temperature range, native predator index, tectonic stability, radiation flux, seasonal variance, and about 40 other things, and it produces a habitability class from 1 to 9. Class 1 is a garden. Class 9 is a planet that will kill an unprotected compact citizen in under an hour. Old Earth Prime is Class 2. My homeworld, Ashen of the Quiet Shelves, is Class 1, and I will not apologize for that. We have no predators. We have no seasons worth the name. Our weather is a light, apologetic rain that arrives on schedule and leaves before anybody is inconvenienced. Earth is Class 8. Earth, the homeworld. Not a colony, not a mining hell, the planet they evolved on. Class 8. 63,000 species that will actively try to end you. Tectonic plates that grind against each other and drown cities. Storms that spin. Fungal spores that eat lungs. A magnetic field that flickers. A moon that drags the ocean back and forth across the land twice a day, every day forever, and they built their cities on the line where the water stops. And they did not leave. For 200,000 years they did not leave. They just got better at it. That was Earth, Class 8. Tamsin Row was not from Earth. Tamsin Row was from Hark's Landing. Hark's Landing is Class 9. There are, in the surveyed volume of the compact, 11 Class 9 worlds with permanent settlements. 9 of them are human. The other 2 are research stations that rotate their crews every 90 days and count that as a hazard posting. Hark's Landing sits at 1.6 standard gravity. Its atmosphere is breathable if you don't mind the sulfur, which they apparently don't. It has a 200-day storm season during which the wind does not drop below what my textbook charmingly called structural threshold. The rain is warm and slightly acidic. There is a native organism there, a burrowing thing the settlers named the grindworm, because humans name things exactly what they are, which grows to 4 meters and is drawn to the vibration of footsteps. 19,000 people live there. The colony is 206 years old. When I read that in the intake file, I read it 3 times because I assumed I had misunderstood a unit conversion. 206 years, 19,000 people, voluntarily. The file listed the colony's primary export as structural alloy, and its primary import as nothing. I want you to sit with that. Their primary import was nothing, not unlisted, not classified. A survey officer went to Hark's Landing and asked what they needed. And the answer was, "We're fine." She was 1.6 meters tall. I checked because I could not stop myself from checking. She came up to the middle of my chest. Ozzo the Carolan could have picked her up under one arm, and did in fact offer to once as a joke in the first week. And she'd laughed and said, "You can try, big man." And he had tried, and he had not managed it, and everyone including Ozzo had decided that was very funny and moved on. I did not move on. I'd been standing on the deck plating. I'd felt him strain. She had dark hair she kept cropped short with what I later learned was a knife, because the barber unit's programming didn't include human keratin, and she'd stopped waiting for the update. Brown skin, a shade or two lighter on the palms, a scar across the bridge of her nose that she said was from a door, in a tone that made it clear she wasn't going to elaborate on which door or why the door had won. Her hands. I want to describe her hands, because I don't think anybody on that station really looked at them until it was too late. They were small. Human hands, 4 fingers and the strange opposable one, and the skin across the palms and the base of the fingers was thick and yellowed and cracked. Callous. That's the word. Dead tissue, built up in layers over years until the hand stops being soft. She had callus on her knuckles. I remember noticing that in the mess hall and thinking, with the perfect stupidity of a second-year cadet who had never been struck in his life, what does she do that puts weight on her knuckles? The mess hall on Lattice 9 had 11 serving lines, one for each chemistry group, and a long common floor with tables sized for everything from a Threx to a vellum drift. Humans, being human, sat wherever they wanted. Tamsin Rowe sat at the Ashun table. I do not know why. I have theories. My favorite theory is that the Ashun table was the quietest one, and the second favorite is that she noticed I was alone, and the third and least favorite is that she'd already worked out that the Ashun were the only species on that station physically incapable of posing a threat to her, and she wanted one meal a day where nobody was measuring her. She set her tray down across from me. It had an apple on it. I knew what an apple was, because human dietary requests had crashed the hydroponics queue for a month, and I'd read the incident report out of pure spite. Malus domestica, a fruit that a species spent 9,000 years selectively breeding for sweetness. They brought seeds, across 400 light years, through the vetting committee, past quarantine, and the argument that got them through was that human digestion and human morale were considered linked systems. They fought a bureaucratic war so they could have something sweet. "Your Pell," she said. "You did the acoustics thing in Vashka's class." I said something. I don't remember what, probably yes. "That was good," she said. "You said you could hear the plating fatigue in Section 12. Was that real?" "It's real." "Huh?" She took a bite of the apple. The sound of it went through the table, through my forearms, into the struts of my ribs, a bright, splitting crack of moisture and fiber. My whole skeleton flinched. "They fix it. They filed it." She snorted, "Yeah." That was the entire conversation. 4 exchanges. Then she ate, and I ate, and she left before I did, and I sat there with my hearts going too fast and thought about the sound of her teeth going through that apple. I want to be clear, I was not afraid of her, not then, not the way you're thinking. I was afraid of the arithmetic, because I had just heard a set of jaws close and my bones had done the math on the pressure, the way they always do, without asking me first. And the number was wrong. Her file said she was 19, standard years. 19 years on a world at 1.6 gravity, every step from her first, carrying 60% more than her body was designed for, bone laid down thicker, tendon anchored deeper, muscle grown dense the way muscle grows when it has never once in its life been allowed to be lazy. And then you take that body, and you put it in 0.9. Do you understand what I'm saying? She was lighter here. Every day she woke up on lattice 9, she woke up in a body that had spent 19 years training against a resistance that was no longer there. She said once, laughing, that the first week on station she kept overshooting doorways, kept coming down the stairs 3 at a time by accident. She said it like it was funny, like being clumsy was the embarrassing part. None of us, not one of us, not one instructor, not one committee sat down and did the arithmetic on what that meant. We looked at her and saw a small person. Now Sarn die. Sarn Olvith die, of the house die of the Olvith. I want to be fair to him. I've had a long time to think about whether I want to be fair to him, and I've decided that I do, because the version of this story where he's simply a villain is a comfortable story, and comfortable stories are how a species like mine sleepwalks into a war. The Olvith are tall, 2.5 meters, 4-jointed arms, a build that reads as intimidating in every single culture in the compact, which is not an accident, because for 600 years the Olvith were the compact's soldiers. Their homeworld is Class 3, gravity 0.7. Their bones are long and light, their muscles are wire, and they are, I say this with respect, beautifully engineered for a world where things do not weigh very much. And they built a dueling culture on top of it. Not war, duels, ritual, formal generations of it, an entire body of technique with names and lineages and a grammar. Sarn Dai was the fourth of his line to attend Lattice 9, and he wore, on the collar of his uniform, a small gray pin that meant his great-grandmother had killed someone with her hands in a sanctioned duel and had been thanked for it afterward. He was not stupid. That's the part people get wrong. He finished third in tactical analysis. He wrote a paper on supply line interdiction that got cited. He was polite to instructors, and he was decent to the cadets he considered peers, and he once carried a vellum drift cadet to medical after a lab accident and stayed until she woke up. He just did not think humans were people. Not in a hateful way, in an administrative way, the way you don't think about the algae in the recyclers. They'd arrived, they were loud, they smelled of salt and iron, they ate constantly, and they came from a planet the Compact's own survey rated as a mistake. And they were small. That was the thing that undid him. Every instinct the Olvith had built over 600 years said, read the frame, read the reach, read the mass. He read Tamsin Rowe's frame and got a number, and the number said harmless, and he believed the number because the number had never been wrong before. The Compact had never met a Deathworlder. It started with the apple. Second month, mess hall. Rowe at the ashen table, me across from her, both of us mostly not talking, which had become our arrangement, and which I had come to look forward to in a way I would not have admitted under oath. Sarn Dai walked past, stopped, looked at the apple. What is that? Rowe didn't look up. Apple. It is organic. That's the idea. You grow it on the station. Hydroponics deck, 3rd tier. She turned it in her fingers. Took a while, wrong light spectrum, had to argue. Sarn Dai made the Olvith sound for polite disgust, a short click behind the back teeth. It has been alive. Most food has. Not recently. She looked up then. And I remember this, I remember it very clearly because I was watching her face and I saw nothing on it. No anger, nothing. She just looked at him for about 2 seconds and then went back to her apple. That was worse than anger. He felt it too. I felt his weight shift through the deck. Where I come from, he said, we do not eat things that could still bruise. Where I come from, Rose said, we eat what's there. And she took another bite. He stood over her for 4 more seconds, then he left. Nobody at the table said anything. Azo, 2 seats down, was very carefully studying his tray. I said quietly, you should not provoke him. Ro chewed, swallowed, I didn't. He thinks you did. Yeah, She looked at the door he'd gone through, and for the first time I saw something on her face that I couldn't name. Not fear, something tired. He's been circling for a month, Pell. It's not about the apple. Then what is it about? She thought about it. He needs to know, she said. That's all. He's got a number in his head about what I am, and he's never had to check it, and it's itching him. She turned the core in her fingers. Everybody's like that with us. Everybody. They get this look. Like they want to poke the thing in the tank and see if it's really asleep. She dropped the core in the recycler. He'll poke it eventually, she said. They always do. And then they're upset about what happens next, like it was my idea. I want to tell you about the 3 weeks between the apple and the sparring hall, because those 3 weeks are where the guilt lives. Not his guilt, mine. Because I watched it build. I felt it build in my bones, the way you feel a hull stress before a seam gives. Small things. The gravity plating in the Ulvath wing was set to 0.8, a courtesy granted to species from low-gravity worlds, entirely reasonable, entirely standard. Sarn Dai raised at a cadet forum the question of whether the human cadets should be granted the same courtesy. In reverse, their quarters raised to 1.4, in fairness, in consistency. He said it smiling. He said it as a joke about how much they must miss home. It went to a committee. The committee said no, on the grounds of structural load on the plating. Not on the grounds that it was cruel, on the grounds that the floor couldn't take it. Nobody noticed that. I noticed that. Ro noticed that. We looked at each other across the mess hall when the ruling came through, and she raised her cup slightly, and I understood that we had both read the same sentence and understood the same thing, which is that the compact had assessed the situation and had been more worried about the deck. Then the ration audit. Somebody, never proven, and I'm not going to pretend I don't know, filed a query about human caloric intake being 300% of compact median. It became a whole thing. There was a notice. Human cadets were asked to log their consumption for a month. Ro logged it, every gram, handed it in early, neatly formatted, with a one-line note at the bottom explaining that a human at rest burns roughly what a Carolan burns sprinting, and that this was not a defect, and that she'd be happy to demonstrate. Nobody took her up on it. Then, field exercise, section 14, low-pressure environment training. Somebody adjusted the buddy pairings so that Ro was assigned to an evacuation drill with a Threx cadet massing 400 kilograms. The drill required carrying your partner 100 meters. The instructor pulled her aside before it started, apologetic, embarrassed, ready to reassign. She said, "It's fine." She carried him 94 meters before her knee went, and she went down on it and got back up and carried him the last 6. 94 meters, 400 kilograms, in 0.9 gravity. I was standing on the observation deck. I felt every step. Every single step came up through the station and hit me in the chest, and the interval never varied, not once, not even when she was limping, because she wasn't slowing down, she was shortening her stride, which is a thing you do when you have decided the distance is going to be crossed, and the only remaining question is what it costs. Sarn Dai was standing 4 meters from me. I heard him say to nobody, "The plating assisted her." The plating did not assist her. The plating was calibrated. I would have felt it. He said it because he needed it to be true. And Ro, I have to say this, because it's the part that matters, and it's the part that everyone forgets when they talk about what happened in that hall. Ro never once hit anybody. 3 weeks of it, the forum, the audit, the drill, the comments in corridors, the sound of Ulvath cadets clicking behind their teeth when human cadets walked past. She took all of it and she put it somewhere and she went to class. Once in the corridor outside applied astrogation. An Ulvath cadet, not Sarn, one of the ones who followed him, bumped her shoulder hard enough to put her into the bulkhead. She went into it with a sound that made 3 cadets turn around. She got up, she dusted her sleeve, and she said, "You okay?" You okay? To him. He stared at her. She walked away. I asked her later why. She was quiet for a while. We were in the observation blister, ossuary hanging there filling the window, a storm the size of Ashun of the quiet shelves crawling across its equator with lightning going off inside it in perfect silence. On the landing, she said, you don't hit people. I would think. No, listen. She tapped the glass with one knuckle. 19,000 of us. Storm season, 200 days. You're in a shelter with the same 40 people and you can't go outside and the walls are shaking. You know what kills colonies? It's not the storm. She let that sit. My grandmother told me everybody's strong here. That's the problem, everybody. So we made a rule and we made it hard. You don't put hands on people. You don't push. You don't shove. Because if we start, we can't stop and there's 19,000 of us and no doctors. She looked at her own hand, turned it over, calloused palm, calloused knuckles. You learn to eat it, she said. You learn to eat a lot. I said, and if you can't? She smiled. It was not a happy smile. Then you don't start it, she said, but you finish it. Combat applications, third period, the hall we called the grind. Let me set it for you properly, because I have been in that room 100 times and I can still smell it. It's big, 40 meters by 60. The ceiling is high enough that the Velumdrift cadets can do their gliding forms without clipping a strut. The floor is tessellated pressure matting, hexagonal plates, each one instrumented, each one reading force and distribution and reporting it to a console at the head of the hall. Step wrong on that floor and the console knows. Fall on it and it logs the impact in newtons and flags it if it's over threshold. Medical drones sit in recesses along both walls, 4 of them. Squat gray things with folded arms, motionless, patient. You forget they're there. I never forgot they were there because they hummed and I felt the hum in my hands. The air smelled of scrubber ozone and dry mat. And the light was that flat blue-white station light that makes everybody look slightly like a corpse, and out through the long window at the far end. Ossuary always, filling everything, with its storms going and going. Instructor Vashka Rune ran that room. She was Carolan, old, 6 limbs, 2 of which were prosthetic, and she did not disguise them or apologize for them. Her hide was the gray of old rope. She had a way of standing perfectly still that made 40 cadets stop fidgeting all at once. She'd fought at the Fenrun Gap. Nobody knew what she'd done there because she never said and the citation was sealed. And once, a first year had asked her about it and she'd looked at him for a long moment and then said, I lived, and gone back to the lesson. She was, I want to be clear, a good instructor. That's part of it too. She was not cruel and she was not careless and she did not favor anybody. She had taught in that hall for 31 years and she had never lost a cadet. She had also never taught a human. The unit was restraint and control. Week 2, wrist locks. There's a hold in the Ulvith grammar called the Sevith, the closing. You take the opponent's wrist. You rotate the forearm outward while you drive the elbow inward against the joint's short axis. It ends the fight because it puts the opponent in a position where their own structure is the thing hurting them, and any resistance they mount makes it worse. It's elegant. I want to be honest about that. 600 years of refinement went into that hold. It works on Carolan, on Threx, on Velumdrift. It works on Ashun so well that we are prohibited from practicing it above quarter speed because our forearms come apart. It works on Ulvith. That's the point. That's who it was designed for. Long bones, light structure, a joint built for reach and speed. Instructor Rune demonstrated it on a training frame. The frame's arm bent. The console beeped. The intent, she said, is control, not damage. Damage is a failure of the technique. She let go of the frame, pair off. And that was the moment, right there, not the elbow that came later. That was the moment when 40 cadets stood up and turned to find a partner, and the room did its little shuffle, and Sarn Dai crossed 30 meters of matting to stand in front of Tamsin Row. I felt him cross it every step. He wasn't heavy, he was just committed. I was 2 pairs away. I had drawn Azo, who was terrified of breaking me and was therefore a delight to spar with, because he treated my arms like antique glassware. I looked up, and Sarn Dai was standing in front of her. And she looked up at him, a long way up, and she didn't move. Human. Sarn. You will partner with me. Rowe glanced past him, looked at the other human cadets across the hall, looked at the console, looked at Instructor Rune, who was watching, who saw all of it. Who I will not let anybody tell me didn't see all of it. Rune said nothing. And Rowe said, sure. That's what she said, sure, 1 syllable, flat as the floor. I have thought about that syllable more than I have thought about most of my life. Because she knew. Of course she knew. She'd known for 3 weeks. She'd said it herself, sitting in the observation blister with the biggest storm in the system going off silently behind her head. He'll poke it eventually. And she could have said no. She could have said, Instructor, I request a different partner. And Rune would have granted it, and Sarn Dai would have made a face, and it would have gone into a file somewhere, and nothing would have happened, and I would not be telling you this. She didn't say no. I've asked myself why. I asked her why afterward when there was an afterward. She said, because he was going to do it anyway, and I'd rather it happen in a room with a medic in it. They squared up. Sarn Dai took the receiving position first, because he was generous like that, because he wanted her to try the hold on him and fail. He held out his arm. He was very tall. His 4-jointed arm came out and down, and his wrist hung there in front of her face at the height of her chin, and he waited, and one of his people snickered somewhere behind me. Rowe took his wrist. I watched her hands. Small hands, cracked yellow callus, and she set them on his wrist the way you'd set a hand on a door you weren't sure was hot. She rotated, slow, careful, textbook. She got about 1/3 of the way through the 7th and stopped. That's it, she said. That's where I'd stop. Sarn Dai laughed, out loud. The Ulvath laugh is 3 descending clicks, and it is not a pleasant sound in a large room. Stop, you have not begun. There is no pressure, nothing. He pulled his arm free without effort. He did not even shift his stance. You did not close it. I know. Why? And Rose said, and I want you to hear this in the flat, tired Hark's Landing way she said it, like a woman reading a safety placard she had read 1,000 times. Because it had come off. Silence in about a 3-meter radius. Sarn Dai's head tilted. That Ulvath tilt, the one that means I have received input and I am declining to process it. It would come off, he repeated. Your arm at the elbow. She looked at his wrist, not at his face. I'm not going to do that. Somebody laughed, not Sarn Dai, one of the others. And I felt it in the floor. I felt Sarn Dai's weight settle back through his heels. Felt the exact microsecond where a man decides he has been insulted in front of his people, and that the ledger now requires balancing. Then I will demonstrate, he said, on you. Here is where I have to be very precise. There was an inquiry. I gave testimony. I have read the console log which recorded every plate on that floor at 400 samples per second, and I have watched the hall footage more times than is good for me. So let me be precise. Instructor Rune was 11 meters away, facing the console, her back 3/4 turned. She was reviewing a pressure trace from the pair before us. She had said, 40 seconds earlier, quarter speed, receiving partner taps to yield. Quarter speed, she said it, it's on the log. Sarn Dai reached for Tamsin Rowe's left arm. He did not do it at quarter speed. He did it at what the analysts later described as 60 to 70% of demonstrated maximum, which for an Ulvath cadet, 3rd in his year, with 600 years of dueling grammar in his tendons, is very fast indeed. And he did not take her wrist. That's the detail that the transcript loses. He didn't take her wrist. He took her forearm high, above the wrist, hand closing hard around the meat of it, thumb dug into the underside, which is not the seventh, which is not a technique at all, which is what you do when you have stopped teaching and started holding a person still. I felt his grip close through the floor. I want to say I shouted. I didn't. There wasn't time to shout. There was time to feel my ribs ring with the shock of a hand closing on a limb, and to think, in one clear, terrible sentence, he is going to break her arm and he thinks it will be an accident. I have replayed the next 400 milliseconds so many times that I have worn them smooth. Here is what the footage shows. His hand closes on her forearm. Her arm does not move. That's the first thing. That's the thing nobody watching in real time could see, but the footage catches it. 30 frames of Sarn Dai applying rotational force to a limb and the limb not going anywhere. His shoulder drops. His stance shifts. His second elbow joint flexes. He is now visibly trying. And she is standing there like a bollard. 19 years at 1.6 gravity. Bone density in the 99th percentile of her own species, which was already in the 99th percentile of the compact. Forearm flexors that had spent 2 decades hauling against a world that never let go. He'd taken hold of a structural member. Frame 31. Rose's head comes up. She looks at him. Her face does something. The footage is grainy at that magnification, but I know that face. I'd eaten across from that face for 2 months, and what it did was close. Frame 34. Her right hand comes up and lays across the back of his elbow, just lays there, almost gentle, the way you'd steady a rail. Frame 36. Her left arm, the one he's holding, rotates. Not against his grip, with it, into it. She turned her forearm the way he was already turning it, and she added everything she had, and the difference between his strength and hers went somewhere, and where it went was into the joint her right hand was holding still. Frame 39. The elbow. I told you about the sound. Small, wet ribbon cane. My skeleton got it a half instant before my ears, the way it always does, and my entire body flinched so hard I sat down on the matting. Sarn Dai did not scream. I want that on the record too. He was Ulvith, he was fourth of his line, he had a pin on his collar that meant something, and he did not scream. He made a sound like the air leaving a bag. His knees went out from under him and he folded down onto the pressure matting, and his arm went with him at an angle that arms do not go, and his other 3 hands opened and closed on nothing. The console beeped, one clean tone, impact logged. 40 cadets stood absolutely still. And then, 1 full second later, I counted. I counted because counting is what my people do when we are frightened, and I got all the way to 1 before it broke. Instructor Vashka Rune turned around and said, "What?" Nobody moved. That's the part I still don't understand. 40 cadets, most of them from species that had fought wars, and not one of us moved. The medical drones were already coming out of their recesses. They don't need permission. They read the console, and they were the only things in that hall with any idea what to do. Ro let go of him. She stepped back, 1 step. Her hands came up, open, palms out, fingers spread, and she held them out at chest height where everyone could see them. I don't think anybody else understood what that was. I understood it, because I'd heard her talk about storm season. Look, I'm not holding anything, I'm done. It's over, I'm done. She was breathing hard, not from effort. Her heart rate from the biomonitor log was 152, and it had gone from 61 to 152 in under 2 seconds, which is not exertion, which is adrenaline, which is a body screaming at its owner to run or fight and getting told to do neither. She stood there with her hands up and she looked down at Sarn Dai on the floor, and she said, quietly, to a room of 40 people who could all hear her, "I'm sorry." Then, because nobody said anything, I told you it'd come off." And then her voice cracked just slightly on the last word, and that was the only crack there was. The drones took him. It took two of them because of his size, and the whole time they were fitting the stabilizer, Sarn Dai was staring at Tamsin Row. Not with hate. I've thought about this for a long time and I am confident about it. There was no hate on his face. There was confusion. The absolute, hollowed-out confusion of a man whose instruments have failed. 600 years of grammar, third in his year. A body built to read a frame and know what was inside it. He'd read her. He'd gotten a number. And the number had been wrong by an order of magnitude, and now his arm was in 3 pieces and he did not have anywhere to put that. He said something. The audio caught it. The inquiry translated it as, "What are you?" Roe didn't answer. She had her hands up. She kept them up until the drones were gone, and then she kept them up a bit longer because I don't think she knew what else to do with them. Instructor Rune crossed the hall, 11 meters. She did not hurry. She stopped in front of Roe and looked down at her, and Roe finally lowered her hands, and the whole hall waited. Rune said, "You yielded nothing." Roe said, "No, Instructor." He exceeded the drill speed. "Yes, Instructor." "You did not tap." And Roe said, and I heard her voice go thin here. I heard the 19-year-old under it. "He had my arm, ma'am. I couldn't reach anything to tap on." Rune stood there. Then she turned to the console, and she pulled up the pressure trace, and 40 cadets watched a 31-year veteran of the Fenrun Gap read a floor log in complete silence. She looked at it for 11 seconds. Then she said to the console, to nobody, in a voice I'd never heard her use, "That's not possible." I want to tell you what she was looking at. The tessellated matting reads force through the feet. Every plate, 400 samples a second. When Sarn Dai applied rotational torque to Roe's forearm, Roe braced, and the brace went down her body and out through her boots and into the floor, and the floor measured it. The plates under Tamsin Roe registered a lateral counterload of 1100 newtons. She had 81 kilograms of body mass in 0.9 gravity. Call it 715 newtons of weight. She had generated a horizontal reaction force greater than her own weight, from a standing position, without sliding a centimeter, and had held it for 400 milliseconds while an Ulvith duelist twice her height tried to turn her arm inside out. The console had a warning threshold for plate loading. It's set for Threx. She'd tripped it. They cleared the hall. Rune did it herself, quietly, the way you'd move people out of a room where somebody had died which nobody had. But that was the register of it. 40 cadets filed out onto the concourse and stood around in the flat blue light not talking. An ossuary hung there in the long window with a storm the size of a homeworld turning over on itself. Silent, silent, always silent. Ozzo stood next to me. He was shaking. Carolans shake when they're processing. He said, Pell, you were closest. What did she?" "She didn't do anything," I said. "She broke his arm." "He broke his arm," I said, and I heard my own voice come out strange. "He put his hand around a thing that doesn't move and he pulled." Ozzo looked at me. "She was standing there," I said. My voice was going. My bones were still ringing. They'd ring for 2 more hours. "He pulled on something that was rooted. He might as well have grabbed the stanchion." And I remember Ozzo's face going through several stages and stopping on one I recognized, because it was the one I'd worn in the mess hall the day I heard an apple break. Not anger. Arithmetic. He was doing the arithmetic. He was standing there in a corridor doing, for the first time in his life, the sum that the compact had put off doing for 400 years, and it went like this. If that is what one 19-year-old girl can do to an elbow, then what is a planet full of them? They kept her in a room for 6 hours. Not a cell. They were very careful about that word in the notice, in the inquiry, in every document that came after. Not a cell. An interview suite on the administrative deck with a table and a chair sized for a caravan so her feet didn't touch the floor. 6 hours. Nobody brought her anything to eat. I found that out later, and it's the detail that still, after all this time, makes something go hard and cold in the middle of my chest. 6 hours for a body that burns what a caravan burns sprinting. She didn't ask. Of course she didn't ask. You don't ask on Hark's Landing. You eat what's there. I went and sat outside the door. I don't know why. I'm not brave. My species does not produce brave. I sat on the deck plating in the corridor outside an interview suite on the administrative deck of Lattice 9 with my hollow bones against the cold composite, and I listened. Bone hearing, I could feel her in there. Heartbeat through the floor, slow and heavy and enormous, like something turning over in deep water. At the 4th hour it went up. At the 4th hour, 4 sets of footsteps came down the corridor from the Ulvith wing and stopped at the door, and one of them was very large and very slow, and I did not recognize the gait. And I stood up, all 2¼ meters of me, 91 kilograms of hollow bone and apology, and I put myself in front of the door. I want to tell you I was calm. I had never in my life raised my hand to anybody. I had never been struck. I once broke my wrist opening a supply locker. The large, slow one stopped in front of me and looked down, from a height I did not know a person could occupy. And the light caught a gray pin on a collar, and I understood that Sarn Dai's house had sent someone. And she said, in perfect trade standard with terrible courtesy, "Move, little bird." Here's the thing I've never told anybody. I did. I moved. I stepped aside. I did not say a word. I stood against the bulkhead with my heart's hammering and my bones ringing, and I let 4 Ulvith walk past me into a room where a 19-year-old girl was sitting with her feet not touching the floor. I've had a long time with that. The door sealed. I couldn't hear speech through it, it was rated, but I could feel the floor. I could feel 5 sets of weight in that room, and I sat back down on the plating outside and I put my hands flat against it, and I listened with every strut in my body. For 11 minutes, nothing moved. Nothing, 5 bodies in a room, and not one of them shifted their weight. And then at 11 minutes and something, one heartbeat in that room went up and up, 160, 170, and I knew whose it was, because I'd been feeling it through a floor for 4 hours and it was hers. And it stayed there, and it did not come down. And the 4 sets of footsteps came back out and walked past me, and the large slow one paused and looked down at me sitting on the deck like a folded chair and said, "You should not be here when it starts." They left. I sat there for a while. Then I got up and I put my hand on the door panel and it was locked, and I put my forehead against it instead. And through 2 centimeters of rated composite, in a voice absolutely level, absolutely steady, the voice of a woman reading a safety placard she had read 1,000 times, Tamsin Rowe said, "Pal, go to bed." I said, "What's going to start?" There was a long pause. She said, "They called blood price. On the landing we'd call it something else." "What do we call it here?" And she laughed one short breath, no humor in it at all. "Here," she said, "they call it a sanctioned duel." I stood outside that door for a long time. Behind me, through the corridor window, ossuary filled the dark. A storm 2,000 kilometers wide was tearing itself apart in the upper cloud deck, throwing lightning through 100 kilometers of ammonia, an act of violence so enormous that its light took a moment to reach us. And it made no sound at all. I remember thinking, that's it, isn't it? That's the whole thing. The compact had spent 400 years looking at humanity through a window, filed under Class 8, filed under Provisional, filed under Common Terrestrial Omnivore. We watched the lightning and we saw no sound, and we decided there was nothing there. And now a house of the Ulvith had put a name in a book, and a girl who weighed 81 kilograms and could not be moved was going to be walked into a ring. And every species on that station, 91 of them, 60,000 cadets, was going to stand around the glass and finally, find out what happens when the lightning is close enough to hear. I should have gone to bed. I went to the observation blister, and I sat down, and I watched ossuary turn, and I did the arithmetic. I got a number. I have never been so frightened of a number in my life.